The banging on the door came before the sun was fully up, and Elena Voss knew from the sound alone that something terrible had arrived. It was not a knock. It was a fist, hard and impatient, striking wood again and again until the frame shook. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, and heard her father's voice downstairs, thin and shaking in a way she had never heard before. She pulled on a robe and moved to the top of the stairs, staying in the shadows. Through the gap in the railing, she saw 3 men standing in the front hall, filling the small space with their size and their silence. Her father, Gerald Voss, stood in front of them in his pajamas, his hands raised slightly, as if that could stop whatever was coming. "I told you I would have it by the end of the month," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. The tallest of the 3 men did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "The end of the month was 3 weeks ago, Gerald. You have had extensions. You have had patience. Mr. Marchetti does not have any more of either to give you." Elena's stomach turned over at the name. Marchetti. She had heard it whispered around town before, always followed by a lowered voice and a quick change of subject. She had never understood what her father owed, only that the debt had grown into something that pressed on their house like a weight, something that made him drink more and sleep less, and flinch at every unexpected sound. Now she understood why. She crept down 2 more steps, trying to hear more, and a floorboard betrayed her. It creaked, sharp in the tense silence, and every head in the hallway turned upward. "Elena, go back to your room," her father said quickly. But it was too late. The tall man was already studying her, his eyes moving over her with an assessment that made her skin crawl. "Is this her?" he asked, not to Elena, but to her father, as if she were an object being appraised, rather than a person standing in front of him. Gerald's face went pale. No, she has nothing to do with this." "You said you had nothing to give," the man said calmly, "but I think you do." Elena's mind raced to catch up with what she was hearing, but her body understood before her thoughts did. She turned to run back to her room, some instinct screaming at her to lock the door, to call someone, to do anything. She made it 3 steps before a hand closed around her arm, firm and unyielding, pulling her back down the stairs she had just climbed. "Let go of me," she said, twisting against the grip, but it did not loosen. "Please," her father said, and his voice broke completely now. "Please, not her. Take the house. Take the car. I will find another way." "You have had months to find another way," the tall man said. "Mr. Marchetti offered something different. He said the debt could be settled another way. He said if you could not pay in money, you would pay in something else. Your daughter agreed to this, did she not, Gerald?" Elena stared at her father, waiting for him to deny it, waiting for the outrage that would confirm this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Instead, she watched him look away from her, unable to meet her eyes, and in that single gesture she understood the truth. He had agreed to it. He had traded her without asking, without warning, hoping perhaps that it would never come to this, that some other solution would appear before the men came to collect. No solution had appeared, and now they were here. "You cannot do this," Elena said, her voice rising, panic bleeding into every word. "I am not a thing you can hand over to pay a debt. This is not how the world works." "In your father's world, it is exactly how it works," the man said, and gestured toward the door. "Bring her." She fought. She dug her heels into the floor. She twisted her arm. She reached for the banister and held on until her fingers ached. But 2 men were stronger than one girl in a robe, and within a minute she was being carried, half-dragged, out through the front door and into the cold morning air. A black car waited at the curb, its engine already running, its windows tinted so dark she could not see inside. "Papa!" she screamed, looking back at the house, at her father standing frozen in the doorway. "Papa, do something!" He did not move. He stood there with his hands still slightly raised, his face gray, and said nothing at all. That silence, more than anything else, told her exactly how alone she was. The men put her in the back seat of the car, and one of them climbed in beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, but far enough that he did not touch her again. The doors locked with a soft click that sounded, to her, like a coffin closing. "Where are you taking me?" she said, and was furious with herself for how much her voice shook. "To Mr. Marchetti," the man beside her said, as if this answered everything. The drive felt endless, though later she would realize it had been perhaps 20 minutes. She watched the town slide past the window, familiar streets and shops she had walked 1,000 times, all of it suddenly foreign, as if she were looking at her old life through glass that could not be broken. She thought about screaming for help when they stopped at a light, but the man beside her seemed to sense the thought forming and shifted slightly, a silent warning that made her abandon the idea. Eventually, the car turned off the main road and passed through a set of iron gates that opened as if they had been expecting them. Beyond the gates was a long drive lined with trees, and at the end of it stood a house so large it looked more like something from a film than a place where real people lived. Stone walls, dark windows, a kind of quiet grandeur that felt less like wealth and more like warning. The car stopped in front of the entrance, and the man beside her opened the door and stepped out, offering his hand as if this were a polite visit rather than a kidnapping. Elena ignored the hand and climbed out on her own, her bare feet cold against the stone steps, her robe suddenly feeling like the thinnest possible armor against whatever waited inside. The front doors opened before they reached them, and a woman in her 50s, dressed simply but neatly, stood waiting. Her expression was not unkind, though it was carefully blank, the look of someone who had learned to hide her feelings a long time ago. "This way," the woman said, and led Elena through a hallway lined with paintings, past a curved staircase, and into a large room with tall windows and a fireplace that was not lit. "Wait here," the woman said, and left her alone. Elena stood in the middle of the room, arms wrapped around herself, and tried to think clearly. She could run. The windows were tall, but perhaps one of them opened. She crossed the room and tried the nearest one, but it was locked, and when she looked more closely, she saw it was the kind of lock that needed a key, not simply a latch. She tried another, with the same result. Whoever had designed this room had designed it to keep people from leaving quickly. She heard footsteps behind her and turned, expecting the woman again, but instead, a man stood in the doorway, and everything in her went very still. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his early 30s, dressed in a dark suit that fit him with the kind of precision that suggested everything about him was deliberate. He was not smiling, but he was not scowling either. His eyes, when they found her, held an attention that felt almost physical, as though he were reading something written on her skin. "You must be Elena," he said. His voice was calm, low, entirely without the menace she had expected. "You must be the man who bought me," she said, and was proud of how steady her voice came out this time. Something flickered across his face, gone before she could name it. "I did not buy you," he said. "Your father owed me a significant sum of money. He offered an arrangement instead of the money he did not have. I have not yet decided whether to accept it." "An arrangement," Elena repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Is that what you call this?" "It is what your father called it," the man said. "I am Dante Marchetti. I would ask that you sit, but I understand you have no reason to trust anything I ask of you right now." Elena stayed where she was, near the locked window, watching him the way she might watch a fire that had not yet decided whether to spread. "What happens to me now?" "That depends on several things," Dante said. He moved further into the room, not toward her, but toward the cold fireplace, where he stood with his hands loosely clasped behind his back. "For tonight, you will stay here. No one will touch you. No one will hurt you. Tomorrow, I will speak with your father again, and we will decide what this arrangement actually means." "And if I try to leave?" "The gates are locked, and the walls are high," he said, without any apparent satisfaction in the fact. "I would rather you did not try, for your own safety. There are people beyond these walls who would be very interested to know that your father owes me money and cannot pay it. Some of them are not as patient as I am." Elena did not know what to make of that, whether it was a threat or, strangely, something closer to a warning meant to protect her. She studied his face for some clue, but found only the same calm, unreadable attention he had shown since he walked in. "I want to go home," she said, and hated the small crack in her voice on the last word. "I understand," Dante said, "but your home is the reason you are here. I am sorry for that. It is not how I would have chosen to bring anyone into this house." He turned then and walked to the door, pausing before he left. The room upstairs, second on the left, is prepared for you. The door is not locked. If you need anything, Marta will be nearby." He looked at her once more, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "You are safe here tonight, Elena. That is the only promise I can make you right now." He left before she could respond, and she stood alone in the cold room for a long time, listening to the silence of the enormous house around her, trying to understand how her life had changed so completely between one sunrise and the next. She thought of her father's face in the doorway, the way he had let her be taken without a single word of protest, and something inside her hardened even as her hands continued to shake. The woman named Marta returned a few minutes later, carrying a tray with tea and a plate of bread and fruit, setting it down on a small table near the window without a word. Elena watched her, searching her face for some sign of cruelty or satisfaction, but found only tiredness, the look of someone who had worked in this house long enough to stop asking questions about the things that happened within its walls. "You do not have to be afraid of the food," Marta said finally, noticing the way Elena stared at the tray without touching it. "No one here means to poison you. That is not how Mr. Marchetti does business." "How comforting," Elena said, and immediately regretted the bitterness in her voice, though Marta did not seem offended by it. "You should eat something," Marta said instead. "Whatever happens next, it will be easier to face on a full stomach. I have seen enough guests come through this house to know that fear, on an empty stomach, only grows sharper." "Guests," Elena repeated. "Is that what I am?" Marta paused at the door, considering the question with more seriousness than Elena expected. "I do not know what you are yet," she admitted. "I have not seen him bring anyone here the way he brought you. Usually it is business, men in suits, arguments about money, then they leave. This is different." She did not explain further, only nodded once and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. Elena sat with that thought for a long time after the door clicked shut, turning it over, trying to decide if it meant anything good or simply another kind of danger she did not yet understand. She ate a little of the bread, more out of habit than hunger, and drank the tea because her hands needed something to hold on to. Through the window she could see part of the grounds, a wide lawn bordered by trees, a stone path leading toward what looked like a smaller building, set apart from the main house. She wondered if that was where the men who had taken her lived, or if it served some other purpose entirely. Everything about the estate spoke of careful design, of a life built to control exactly what could be seen and what could not. She thought about her mother, gone 3 years now, and wondered for the first time in a long while what she would have said if she could see her daughter standing in a locked room in a stranger's house, traded away like a debt written on paper. Her mother had always warned Gerald about his habits, about the men he met with late at night, about the money that seemed to vanish faster than it arrived. Elena had been too young then to understand the shape of the danger her mother saw coming. Now she understood it completely, and the understanding came far too late to change anything. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and she straightened instinctively, expecting Marta again. Instead, the door opened to reveal Dante, still in the same dark suit, though his tie had been loosened slightly, as if the day had already worn at him despite the early hour. "I did not expect to see you again so soon," Elena said, unable to keep the wariness from her voice. "I wanted to make sure you had eaten," he said, glancing at the tray, noting the bread that had been touched and the tea that had been drunk. Something in his expression eased slightly at the sight, though he did not comment on it. "Is that truly why you came, or did you want to check that I had not tried to climb out the window?" Elena said. A faint, almost reluctant curve touched the corner of his mouth. "Both perhaps, though I suspect you already discovered the windows do not open." "I did. That was not my design," he said. "This house was built by my grandfather, in a different time, for different reasons. I have not changed much of it." He stepped further into the room, though he kept a careful distance from her, standing near the fireplace rather than closer to where she sat. "I heard you woke early this morning. There was some activity outside that likely disturbed you." Elena's pulse quickened at the memory of the cars in the drive, the tense voices, the man who had looked up at her window. What was that? "Business," Dante said simply, and she understood immediately that this was not an answer she would be given more of. "Nothing that concerns you. I would ask that you stay away from the windows in the early hours, for your own comfort." The mornings here are sometimes less than pleasant to witness. The careful way he phrased it, less than pleasant, rather than dangerous or violent, told her more than the words themselves did. Whatever business occupied Dante Marchetti, it was not the kind conducted over polite breakfast meetings. "You still have not told me what happens to me," Elena said. "Not really. You said it depends on things. What things?" Dante studied her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw something she had not expected to find there, a kind of weariness that did not match the confidence of his posture or the calm of his voice. "It depends on your father," he said finally, "and it depends on you. I have given him time to consider other ways to settle what he owes. If he finds one, you will go home, and none of this will matter again. And if he does not find one, then we will have a different conversation," Dante said, and did not elaborate further. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite name. "For what it is worth, Elena, I did not ask for this arrangement. Your father offered it. I have not yet decided whether to accept what he offered. That decision is still mine to make, and I intend to make it carefully." He left her with those words hanging in the quiet room, and Elena sat with them long after his footsteps had faded down the hallway, uncertain whether they were meant to comfort her or simply to remind her how completely her fate now rested in the hands of a stranger. Eventually she found her way upstairs, following the path the woman had described, and found the door on the left standing open, just as he had said. Inside was a bedroom larger than her entire apartment back home, the bed already made, a small lamp glowing warm against the dark. She checked the door twice, disbelieving that it truly had no lock keeping her in, and then, exhausted beyond anything she had ever felt, she lay down on top of the covers, still in her robe, and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally took her. She woke sometime near dawn to the sound of voices below her window, low and urgent, speaking in a tone that made the hair on her arms rise. She could not make out the words, only the shape of the tension in them, and when she rose to look outside, she saw 2 cars in the drive that had not been there before, men moving between them with the quick, controlled purpose of people handling something dangerous. One of the men below looked up, briefly, and seemed to find her silhouette in the window. She stepped back quickly, heart hammering, unsure if she had imagined the way his gaze had lingered a beat too long. She sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed as the gray light of morning crept through the curtains, and understood, with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in her chest, that whatever house she had been brought to, whatever man now held her father's debt in his hands, this was not a place of simple answers. There was danger here, moving just beneath the surface of politeness and locked windows, and she had no idea yet whether Dante Marchetti was the source of it, or the only thing standing between her and something far worse. The sound of a car door slamming outside jolted Elena awake, and for one disoriented second, she thought she was back in her own bed, safe, until the unfamiliar ceiling above her reminded her exactly where she was. She sat up quickly, breath-catching, and listened. No shouting this time, no urgent voices, just the ordinary sound of morning settling over a house that was not hers. She rose and crossed to the window, careful to stay back from the glass the way Dante had warned her, and looked down at the drive below. A single car was parked there now, unremarkable, and a man in a gray coat was walking toward the front steps carrying a leather case. Nothing about the scene looked dangerous. It looked, if anything, almost mundane, like any other morning meeting at any other large house. A knock came at her door, softer than Marta's usual knock, and when Elena opened it, she found a folded set of clothes waiting on a chair just outside, along with a note in careful handwriting. "Breakfast is in the small dining room, down the stairs and to the right, whenever you are ready." There was no signature, but she recognized the precision of the words as belonging to Dante rather than Marta. She dressed slowly, turning the strange kindness of it over in her mind. Clean clothes, a folded note, an invitation rather than a summons. None of it matched what she had expected from a man who held her family's debt like a leash around her neck. She told herself not to be fooled by small comforts. Comfort was, after all, one of the oldest tools used to make a cage feel like a home. The small dining room turned out to be smaller only by comparison to the rest of the house. A long table sat beneath another set of tall windows, this time unlocked, she noticed. though the drop to the ground below was still too far to consider jumping. Dante was already seated at one end, a newspaper folded beside his plate, a cup of coffee steaming untouched in front of him. "You slept," he said, looking up as she entered, something like relief flickering briefly across his face before it smoothed away again. "Not by choice," Elena said, taking the seat across from him, because it was the farthest from his end of the table that still counted as joining him. "My body simply gave up fighting the exhaustion." "A reasonable response to the day you had," Dante said. He gestured toward the spread of food between them, eggs and fruit and warm bread, none of it extravagant, all of it clearly meant to be shared rather than displayed. "Please, eat." She did, cautiously at first, then with more appetite than she expected, once her body remembered it had not eaten a proper meal in almost a day. Dante did not press her to talk, did not fill the silence with questions the way she had braced herself for. He simply ate his own breakfast, occasionally glancing at the newspaper, occasionally glancing at her, as though he were still deciding something about the situation neither of them had chosen. "I spoke with your father this morning," he said eventually, and Elena's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "And?" "He has no other way to pay what he owes," Dante said. There was no cruelty in the way he said it, only a flat, unavoidable fact. "I gave him until the end of the week to find one. I do not expect he will." Elena set down her fork, appetite gone as quickly as it had come. "So I stay here, indefinitely." "You stay here," Dante said, "until I decide the terms of what that means." "I told you yesterday, I have not yet accepted the arrangement your father offered. I am still considering it." "What is there to consider?" Elena said, frustration breaking through the careful calm she had tried to maintain. "Either you keep me here to pay off what he owes, or you let me go. Those seem like the only two choices." "There are always more than two choices," Dante said. "That is something I learned a long time ago, in circumstances far worse than the one you find yourself in now." He set down his own fork, folding his hands together as he studied her across the table. "You are not a piece of property to me, Elena. Whatever your father believed he was offering, I do not know yet what you are, but I intend to find out before I decide anything permanent." The words unsettled her more than any threat could have, because they did not match anything she understood about men like him. She had built her expectations on stories, on the low whispered rumors that followed his name through town, on the certainty that a man who collected debts with violence would treat a person the same way he treated a number on a ledger. Instead, he sat across from her, offering breakfast and vague promises of consideration, and she did not know what to do with the contradiction. "You could simply let me go," she said quietly. "Forgive the debt. Send me home." Something crossed his face then, quick and unreadable. "It is not that simple," he said. "There are people who know your father owes me money. If I forgive it without consequence, it tells every other man in this city that my debts can be walked away from. That is not a message I can afford to send, not in the world I live in." "So I am a message," Elena said, bitterness sharpening her voice. "You are not," Dante said, more firmly than he had spoken before. "Which is exactly why I have not simply used you as one. If I wanted a message, I would have handled this very differently. What I am offering you, for now, is time. Time for your father to find another solution. Time for me to decide what I actually want from this arrangement, if anything." He rose from the table, leaving his coffee unfinished. "I have business to attend to today. Marta will show you the grounds, if you would like some air. You are not a prisoner in the strictest sense, Elena, though I understand why it may not feel that way yet." He left the room before she could respond, and she sat alone at the long table, staring at the food in front of her, trying to decide whether his words were meant to reassure her, or simply to make the cage more comfortable to live in. True to his word, Marta appeared an hour later, and offered to walk with her through the gardens. Elena accepted, mostly out of a need to move, to feel something other than the walls of her room pressing in around her. The grounds were larger than she had realized from her window, stretching back behind the house into a wooded area, with a stone wall running along the perimeter that was too high to climb, and, she suspected, watched too closely to attempt. "How long have you worked for him?" Elena asked as they walked, mostly to fill the silence. 15 years, Marta said. "I came when his father still ran things. Dante was young then, barely more than a boy, though he never acted like one, not even at 17. What was he like before he became this? Marta considered the question carefully, the way she seemed to consider most things. Serious, she said finally. Watchful. He learned very early that trust was a luxury he could not always afford. His father made sure of that. She glanced sideways at Elena. I have seen him make hard decisions in this house, decisions that cost him sleep, even when they were the right ones. But I have never seen him cruel for the sake of it. Whatever you believe about the men in this world, Dante is not the worst of them. Not by a wide measure. Elena absorbed this in silence, watching the trees shift in the breeze, trying to reconcile the calm, considered man from breakfast with the reputation that had followed his name through every whispered conversation she had ever overheard in town. They walked past the smaller building she had noticed from her window, and Marta's pace quickened slightly as they passed it, her expression tightening in a way that told Elena not to ask questions about it. She filed the reaction away without comment, another small piece of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. By the time they returned to the house, the afternoon had grown warm, and Elena felt, for the first time since the men had pounded on her father's door, something close to calm. It frightened her more than the fear had. She did not want to grow comfortable here. Comfort made it easier to forget how she had arrived, easier to forgive the man responsible for keeping her. That evening, Dante did not appear for dinner, and Marta explained only that he had been called away on business that could not wait. Elena ate alone in the small dining room, the empty chair across from her, somehow louder than any conversation might have been. She found herself, against every instinct telling her not to, wondering where he had gone, and whether the danger she had sensed beneath the surface of the house had followed him out into the night. She was still awake near midnight when she heard raised voices below her window again, sharper this time, edged with something that sounded like anger held just barely in check. She rose and crept to the glass, careful to stay in shadow, and saw Dante standing in the drive, his jacket gone, his shirt sleeves rolled, speaking to a man she did not recognize in a tone that carried even through the closed window, though the words themselves stayed just out of reach. The other man said something that made Dante go very still. Then, in one sharp motion, Dante closed the distance between them and said something low and final, something that made the other man step back immediately, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Whatever authority Dante held in this world, she understood in that moment, was absolute, and it was not built on kindness. The man left quickly after that, and Dante stood alone in the drive for a long moment, head tilted back, looking up at the dark sky as though searching it for an answer to a question Elena could not hear. Then he turned, and for one heart-stopping second, his gaze lifted to her window. She stepped back too late. Their eyes had already met. She did not know what she expected him to do. Call out, send someone up to reprimand her for watching. Instead, he only held her gaze for a long moment across the distance, something unreadable passing over his face, before he turned and walked back inside the house without another word. Elena stood by the window long after he disappeared, her heart still racing, uncertain whether it was fear that had put it there, or something far more complicated, something she was not yet ready to name. She thought of Marta's words, of the boy who had learned too young that trust was a luxury, and wondered, not for the first time that day, exactly what kind of man she had been given to. Sleep did not come easily that night. When it finally did, it was filled with half-formed images of locked gates and quiet gardens, and a pair of dark eyes finding hers across a shadowed drive, and she woke the next morning no closer to understanding what any of it meant than she had been the day before. She found him in the small dining room again, though later than usual, his tie absent altogether this time, a faint shadow of exhaustion beneath his eyes that told her he had slept even less than she had. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the memory of the previous night sitting unacknowledged between them, like a third presence at the table. "You were awake," he said finally, not quite a question. "I heard voices," Elena said, choosing honesty, because she suspected he would see through anything less. "I did not mean to watch." "I know," Dante said. He poured coffee into a second cup and slid it toward her. A small, wordless gesture that felt oddly intimate in the quiet room. It is not the sort of thing I would choose for you to see. Was it about me? She asked. The man last night. Was he threatening you because of my father's debt? Dante was quiet for a long moment, turning his own cup slowly on its saucer. Not directly, he said. There are men in this city who watch for weakness the way vultures watch a wounded animal. A debt unpaid, a guest kept under my roof without clear purpose. These things look like weakness to men who do not understand the difference between patience and hesitation. He looked up at her then, his gaze steady. I handled it. You do not need to concern yourself with the details. That is easy to say, Elena said, when I am the reason the weakness exists in the first place. You are not the reason, Dante said, an edge of firmness entering his voice for the first time that morning. Your father's choices are the reason. I would ask that you stop carrying blame that does not belong to you. She studied him, surprised by the sharpness of his defense, unsure what to make of a man who seemed genuinely bothered by the idea of her taking responsibility for a debt she had never agreed to. You sound almost protective, she said, testing the observation aloud, before she had fully decided whether to trust it. Something flickered across his face, gone as quickly as it appeared. Perhaps I am, he said simply, and did not elaborate further, returning his attention to his coffee, as though the admission had cost him more than he wanted to reveal. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, though it carried a new weight, as if something unspoken had shifted slightly between them, without either party fully agreeing to it. Elena drank her coffee and watched him from across the table, trying to reconcile the calm, careful man in front of her with the version of him she had glimpsed in the drive the night before, sharp and commanding, and, for one brief instant, almost frightening. Can I ask you something? She said eventually. You can ask, Dante said. I cannot promise an answer. Last night, the man you spoke to, what would have happened if you had not handled it the way you did? Dante's expression grew distant, as though he were weighing how much truth to offer her. In this world, weakness invites consequences, he said finally. If I had shown hesitation, if I had let him believe I was uncertain of my own authority, he would have gone back to the people he answers to, and told them exactly that. Word travels quickly among men who are always looking for an opening. It would not have stayed contained to one conversation in my own drive. So you frightened him instead? I reminded him of consequences, Dante said. There is a difference, though I understand it may not look like one from a window upstairs. Elena considered that, turning the distinction over in her mind. She thought of her father, of the way fear had ruled every choice he made in the weeks before the men came to their door, and wondered if this was simply a different shade of the same coin, control wielded through fear rather than kindness, no matter how gently it was dressed up over breakfast. As if sensing the direction of her thoughts, Dante set down his cup and met her eyes directly. I know what you must think of me, Elena, a man who deals in threats and debts and locked gates. I will not pretend that is not part of who I am, but I would ask you to withhold your full judgment a little longer, if you are able. I do not think you have seen enough yet to understand the shape of it. And if I never see enough to understand, Elena said, what then? Then you will leave this house believing the worst of me, Dante said, and I suppose I will have to accept that as a fair outcome, given how you arrived here. He rose from the table, gathering the newspaper he had not opened. I have matters to attend to this morning. Marta has offered to take you into the town later, if you would like it, with an escort, of course. It is not freedom, but it is fresh air beyond these walls, if you want it. Elena watched him leave, turning the offer over in her mind long after the door had closed behind him. An escort, not freedom, he had said himself, plainly, without trying to disguise the cage for what it was. It was, she realized slowly, the most honest thing anyone in this house had offered her since she arrived, and for reasons she could not yet name, that honesty settled something uneasy in her chest that she had been carrying since the moment the men first knocked on her father's door. The phone call came while Elena was still in town with Marta, and she knew instantly from the way Marta's face changed that something had gone badly wrong. Marta listened without speaking for nearly a minute, her knuckles whitening around the phone, before she finally said, "We are coming back now," and ended the call without another word. What happened? Elena asked, hurrying to keep pace as Marta walked quickly toward the waiting car. We need to go, Marta said, which was not an answer at all, and the tightness in her voice told Elena not to press further until they were moving. The drive back to the estate felt longer than the one that had first brought Elena there, tension filling the car like smoke, thick enough to choke on. Marta kept glancing at the rearview mirror, checking the road behind them, and Elena finally understood, with a cold jolt, that Marta was watching for someone following them. Is someone after us? She asked quietly. Not us specifically, Marta said, though the answer did little to comfort her. There has been trouble. A family that has been circling Dante's territory for months finally made a move. I do not know the details. I only know we were told to come back immediately, and when Dante says immediately, he means it. They passed through the iron gates faster than Elena had ever seen them open, and the moment the car stopped, two men she did not recognize appeared, pulling open the doors before Marta had even set the brake. Inside, quickly, one of them said, and Elena found herself being ushered through the front doors of the house with a speed that left no room for questions. Dante was in the front hall, and the sight of him stopped her cold. Gone was the calm, careful man from breakfast. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled, a tightness around his eyes that spoke of exhaustion and fury held in careful, controlled balance. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression shifted immediately, relief flooding through the tension for just a moment, before it hardened again into something more guarded. You are unhurt, he said, more statement than question, though there was an edge of urgency in it that told her the answer mattered to him more than he wanted to show. I am fine, Elena said. What is happening? Come with me, Dante said, and led her not toward the small dining room or the sitting room she knew, but deeper into the house, to a study she had not yet seen, with heavy curtains already drawn against the afternoon light. He closed the door behind them, and for a moment simply stood there, one hand braced against the frame, as though gathering himself before he spoke. There is a family, the Countess, who have wanted my territory for a long time, he said finally. They have made threats before. Usually they are careful to keep them indirect, business disagreements dressed up as negotiations. Today one of their men approached my people directly, and made it clear that they know you are staying here. They suggested that your presence gives them leverage they intend to use. Elena's stomach dropped. Leverage? You mean they threatened to hurt me, to force you to do something? They suggested it, Dante said, his voice tightening with a fury that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with the threat itself. I made it very clear to them what would happen if they acted on that suggestion. And what happens now? Elena asked, fear beginning to climb up through her chest, despite her attempt to keep her voice steady. Do I go home? Would that make this simpler for you, if I was not here to be used against you? No, Dante said, so quickly and so firmly that it surprised them both. He seemed to catch himself, drawing back slightly, though the intensity in his eyes did not fade. Sending you home now would tell them exactly what they hoped to hear, that threatening you works, that it can move me. I will not give them that satisfaction, and more importantly, I will not send you out there unprotected while they are testing how far they can push. So instead, I stay here, inside a house that is apparently now a target, Elena said, the fear sharpening into something closer to frustration. How does that keep me safer? Because inside these walls I control everything, Dante said. The gates, the guards, who comes and who does not. Outside, I control nothing. You would be exposed the moment you stepped beyond my sight. He crossed the room, closer to her than he had ever stood before, close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the restrained anger still simmering just beneath his controlled exterior. I know you did not ask for any of this, Elena. I know you have every reason to resent me for the position you find yourself in, but I need you to trust that keeping you here, for now, is the safest choice available to us. Elena studied his face, searching for the calculation she expected to find there, some hidden motive dressed up as concern. She found instead something that looked disturbingly close to genuine fear, not for himself, but for her, and the discovery unsettled her more than any threat from a rival family could have. Why does it matter to you? She asked quietly. What happens to me? I am a debt your family did not even properly agree to yet. Why does my safety matter this much to you? Dante was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its careful control. "I have asked myself that question more than once, since the morning my men brought you here," he admitted. "I do not have a simple answer for you. I only know that the thought of you being hurt because of a debt your father created has become unacceptable to me, in a way that surprises even me." The admission hung in the air between them, heavier than either of them seemed prepared for. Elena felt something shift inside her chest, some wall she had built in the first hours after being taken from her home, beginning to crack under the weight of his honesty. A sharp knock at the study door broke the moment before either of them could say more, and Dante's expression shuddered instantly back into the controlled mask she had first met. "Enter," he said, and one of his men stepped inside, delivering a low, urgent report that Elena could not fully follow, filled with names and locations she did not recognize. When the man left, Dante turned back to her, the warmth from moments before replaced by a grim, focused determination. "I need to deal with this," he said. "You will stay in the house, in the east wing, where the guards are heaviest. Marta will show you. I do not expect this to take long, but I need to know you are somewhere safe while it is handled." "Be careful," Elena said, the words leaving her before she had fully decided to say them, surprising them both. Something softened briefly in his expression, there and gone in an instant. "I intend to be," he said, and left the study with a speed that told her exactly how urgent the matter truly was. Marta appeared moments later and led Elena through unfamiliar hallways to a wing of the house she had not yet seen, quieter and more heavily guarded than anywhere else, with men positioned at intervals along the corridor who nodded to Marta but watched Elena with careful, professional attention. The room she was given was smaller than her previous one, but the door, she noticed immediately, had a heavy lock, and for the first time since arriving, she found herself grateful for it rather than resentful. The hours that followed crawled by with agonizing slowness. Elena paced the small room, unable to settle, straining to hear any sound from beyond the walls that might tell her what was happening elsewhere in the house, or the grounds beyond it. Marta brought food she barely touched and tried, without much success, to offer reassurance that did little to calm the tight knot of fear sitting in Elena's chest. Night had fully fallen by the time she finally heard footsteps approaching her door, followed by the careful, deliberate knock she had already begun to recognize as Dante's. She opened the door before Marta could reach it, and the sight of him, tired but unharmed, sent a wave of relief through her so strong it nearly buckled her knees. "It is handled," he said, before she could ask. "For now, the Countess understand more clearly now what happens when they threaten what belongs under my protection." He paused, seeming to hear his own words a beat after he had spoken them, and something flickered across his face, an awareness of what he had just called her, whether he had intended to or not. "What belongs under your protection?" Elena repeated slowly, testing the phrase. "A poor choice of words," Dante said, though he did not fully retract them. "Was it?" Elena said. "Poor or accurate?" He held her gaze for a long moment, something unguarded passing across his face that she had not seen from him before. Not the controlled calm of their breakfasts together, nor the sharp authority she had witnessed in the drive. This was something quieter, more uncertain, a man standing at the edge of a decision he had not fully made yet. "I do not know how to answer that without saying more than I have permitted myself to say," he admitted finally. Elena stepped closer, some instinct overriding the caution that had guided every choice she had made since arriving at this house. "Then say it anyway," she said quietly. "I think we have both spent enough time pretending this is simpler than it is." For a moment, neither of them moved, the space between them charged with everything unspoken since the morning her father's debt had delivered her to his door. Then, from somewhere down the hallway, one of his men called his name, urgent and unwelcome, and the moment fractured before either of them could finish it. Dante exhaled slowly, stepping back, though his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. "We will finish this conversation," he said. "I promise you that. But tonight there are still things I need to attend to." He turned to go, then paused, glancing back at her one final time. "Rest, if you can. You are safe tonight. That much I can promise without hesitation." He left her standing in the doorway of the unfamiliar room, her heart still racing from a conversation that had gone somewhere she had not expected it to go, and for the first time since the men had pounded on her father's door 3 days earlier, the fear she carried had begun, quietly and against every instinct she thought she possessed, to make room for something else entirely. She did not sleep quickly that night, replaying the conversation over and over, trying to decide what exactly had shifted between them and whether she trusted the shift at all. Somewhere near midnight, unable to lie still any longer, she rose and moved to the small window of her new room, which, unlike the one she had first been given, looked out over a narrower stretch of the grounds, closer to the smaller building Marta always hurried past. Lights were on inside it now, faint but visible through gaps in heavy curtains, and she could make out the shapes of men moving within, though nothing about their movements told her what business occupied them at such an hour. She thought of Dante's earlier warning about the mornings being less than pleasant to witness, and wondered whether the same warning applied to nights. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, quieter than any she had heard before, and when she opened the door, she found not Dante or Marta, but a young man she did not immediately recognize, dressed in the same dark, plain clothing as the guards stationed along the corridor. "Mr. Marchetti asked me to check that you were settled," the young man said, though something in his tone lacked the careful respect she had come to expect from the household staff. His eyes moved over her in a way that made her instinctively step back, putting more of the door between them. "I am settled," she said. "Thank you." He lingered a moment longer than necessary before nodding and moving away down the corridor, and Elena closed the door quickly, sliding the heavy lock into place with hands that shook slightly. She did not know the man, had never seen him before that night, and something about the encounter left an uneasy residue she could not immediately explain. She mentioned it to Marta the following morning, over a breakfast eaten alone, since Dante had left before dawn to deal with matters related to the previous day's threat. Marta's expression tightened at the description. "That does not sound like anyone who should have been sent to your door," Marta said slowly. "The men assigned to this wing are chosen carefully. I will speak to someone about it." "Is it something to worry about?" Elena asked, the uneasy feeling from the night before returning in full force. "Perhaps nothing," Marta said, though her tone suggested she did not fully believe her own reassurance. "But in this house, it is wiser to raise a concern early than to wait and see if it becomes a larger one. I will make sure Dante hears of this the moment he returns." The day passed slowly without him, the house feeling emptier for his absence in a way that surprised Elena, given how recently she had arrived, and how much of that time had been spent resenting the circumstances that brought her there. She found herself listening for the sound of his car in the drive, and was embarrassed by how much relief flooded through her when it finally arrived in the late afternoon. He came to find her almost immediately, his expression grim before she had even said a word, which told her Marta had already relayed the concern about the previous night's visitor. "Describe him to me," Dante said, and she did, as best she could. The plain clothing, the lingering gaze, the lack of the careful deference the other guards had shown her. Dante's jaw tightened with every detail, something cold entering his expression that she had not seen from him before, colder even than the fury he had shown in the drive days earlier. "That man does not belong to my household staff assigned to this wing," he said finally. "I will find out who let him near you, and why." "Do you think the Countess sent someone?" Elena asked, the fear from the encounter sharpening into something closer to genuine alarm. "I do not yet know," Dante admitted, "but I intend to find out before the night is finished." He studied her for a moment, something protective and fierce settling over his features. "I am sorry, Elena. I told you that you would be safe here, and I meant it. I did not anticipate a gap in my own security." "It is not your fault," Elena said, surprising herself with how readily the words came, how little she blamed him for a danger that had, until 3 days ago, been entirely outside her understanding. "It is precisely my fault," Dante said. "Everything within these walls is my responsibility. I will not make excuses for a failure that put you at risk." He turned to leave, already moving toward whatever investigation he intended to launch, then paused at the door, looking back at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I meant what I said last night. We will finish that conversation, but not until I know you are fully safe. I will not have half of my attention on you, and half on a threat I have not yet resolved." He left her once again with unfinished words hanging between them, and Elena sat with the strange, unfamiliar comfort of being someone's priority, even amid danger she barely understood, turning the feeling over carefully, unwilling, yet to trust it completely, but no longer able to dismiss it either. A scream from somewhere near the gate tore Elena from her sleep, raw and sudden, followed immediately by shouting and the unmistakable sound of running feet on gravel. She was out of bed before she had fully processed what she heard, pulling a robe around herself, moving to the door on instinct alone. The corridor outside was already full of movement, the guards striding past with a purpose that told her something had gone seriously wrong. One of them caught sight of her in the doorway and stopped, his expression tight with urgency. "Stay inside," he said. "Lock the door. Mr. Marchetti's orders, if anything like this happened." "What is happening?" Elena demanded, but the man was already moving away, leaving her standing alone in the corridor, with fear climbing rapidly up her throat. She did not stay inside. She could not with her heart hammering and every instinct screaming at her to understand the danger rather than hide from it blindly. She followed the corridor toward the sound of the commotion, staying close to the wall, until she reached a window overlooking the front drive. Below, chaos had erupted. Two unfamiliar cars sat at odd angles near the gate, doors thrown open, and a handful of men she did not recognize were being forced back by Dante's guards, shouting and struggling, even as they were pushed toward the gate. In the middle of it all stood Dante, his voice carrying clear and hard across the drive even from this distance, directing his men with a controlled fury that made the chaos around him seem to bend to his will, despite its violence. One of the intruding men broke free from the guards holding him and lunged, not toward Dante, but toward the edge of the drive, toward the corner of the house where Elena realized, with sudden horror, that a service entrance led almost directly beneath the window where she stood. She understood in an instant, cold and clear, what the man intended. He was trying to reach the house, to reach her. She backed away from the window and ran, not toward her room, as the guard had instructed, but toward the main staircase, driven by an instinct she did not fully examine in the moment, an unwillingness to simply wait and hope that others would keep her safe while chaos unfolded beneath her window. She reached the top of the stairs just as footsteps pounded up from below, and for one terrifying second, she thought the intruder had made it inside. It was Dante. He came up the stairs two at a time, breathing hard, a thin cut along his jaw that had not been there that morning, and the relief that crossed his face at the sight of her was so raw and immediate that it stole the breath from her chest. "You were supposed to stay in your room," he said, closing the distance between them in 3 quick strides, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders, as though he needed to confirm with his own touch that she was truly unharmed. "I heard him coming toward the house," Elena said, the words tumbling out fast. "I thought if I stayed by the window I could at least warn someone." "You could have been seen," Dante said, though the anger in his voice was clearly aimed less at her and more at the fear that had gripped him moments before. "Elena, if something had happened to you tonight, I do not know what I would have." He stopped himself, jaw tightening, as though the sentence had gone somewhere he had not intended to let it go, not in the middle of a crisis still unfolding below them. "Is it over?" Elena asked. "Downstairs. Is it handled?" "For tonight," Dante said. "They came to test how far my patience had worn thin. They have their answer now." Something dark passed behind his eyes, quickly suppressed. "I need to finish dealing with this, but I am not leaving you unprotected again. You will stay with me, in my part of the house, until I am certain the immediate danger has passed." Elena did not argue. Whatever pride or independence might have pushed her to resist such an arrangement 2 days earlier had been worn down entirely by the sight of a stranger trying to force his way toward her window. She followed him down a hallway she had not yet walked, into a wing of the house that felt distinctly his, spare and controlled, none of the careful decoration that marked the rest of the estate. He settled her into a room adjoining his own study, promising to return once the immediate crisis outside had been fully contained, and left with a final glance that lingered a moment longer than necessary before the door closed behind him. She did not see him again until near dawn. When he finally returned, exhaustion had carved deep lines into his face, and there was a weariness in his movements that spoke of hours spent managing a danger she had only glimpsed in fragments. He found her still awake, seated near the window, unable to sleep with the events of the night replaying endlessly in her mind. "You should rest," he said, though he made no move to leave the room himself. "So should you," Elena said. "You look like you have not slept in days." A faint, tired smile touched his mouth, the first genuine one she had seen from him since the crisis began. "Days might be an accurate estimate," he admitted, lowering himself into the chair across from her, with the careful movements of someone whose body had been pushed past its limits. They sat in silence for a while, the events of the night settling slowly between them, until Elena finally spoke the question that had been building since their unfinished conversation 2 nights before. "You said we would finish talking," she said quietly. "About what you called me. What belongs under your protection?" Dante's gaze lifted to hers, weary but steady. "I did say that," he acknowledged. "I suppose there is no better time than now, given how thoroughly tonight has stripped away any pretense of distance between us." "Then tell me honestly," Elena said, "am I still a debt to you? A transaction your men delivered to settle what my father owed? Or is it something else now?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the careful control she had grown used to. "It stopped being about the debt within the first week," he admitted. "I told myself it was simple caution at first, ensuring nothing happened to you under my roof, because it would reflect poorly on my authority if it did. But that explanation stopped being true very quickly, and I think you already know exactly when it stopped being true." "When?" Elena asked softly, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The night I found you watching from the window while I dealt with Conti's man in the drive," Dante said. "I looked up and saw you there, and something in me that I thought had been buried a long time ago simply refused to stay buried any longer." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, despite the exhaustion weighing on both of them. "I have spent my entire adult life keeping people at a careful distance, Elena. It has kept me alive in a world that punishes weakness without mercy, and in the space of a few days, you have made that distance feel like the least useful thing I have ever built." Elena felt something in her chest crack open at the admission. All the careful walls she had constructed since the morning her father's debt delivered her to this house, trembling under the weight of his honesty. "I came here hating you," she said, "or trying to. It felt safer than the alternative." "And now?" Dante asked, the question barely more than a whisper. "Now I do not know what I feel," Elena admitted, "except that when I thought that man might reach the house tonight, my first fear was not for myself. It was that I would not get the chance to have this conversation with you." Something in Dante's expression shifted entirely then, the last of his careful restraint giving way to something raw and unguarded. He reached across the small distance between them, his hand finding hers, warm and steady despite everything the night had cost him. "I know I do not deserve the easy trust you have begun to give me," he said. "I know the way you arrived here should have made trust between us impossible. But I am asking you, Elena, to consider staying, not because of a debt, not because these walls are the safest place available to you, but because I want the chance to become someone worth staying for." Elena looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his tired, honest face, and felt the last of her resistance finally give way. "The gates are still locked," she said softly. "I could not leave even if I wanted to." "That is not an answer," Dante said, though a faint hope had entered his exhausted eyes. "No," Elena agreed, "it is not." She tightened her hand around his. "But staying because I choose to, that is different from staying because the gates are locked. And I think, for the first time since I arrived, I am beginning to understand the difference." Outside, the first gray light of dawn was beginning to creep over the grounds, chasing away the last shadows of a night that had nearly cost them everything, and in the quiet room, surrounded by exhaustion and danger not yet fully past, something new and fragile had finally found the space to take root. Neither of them spoke for a long while after that, content simply to sit with hands joined while the light outside slowly grew stronger, until exhaustion finally pulled Dante's eyes closed where he sat, his grip on her hand loosening only slightly, as though even unconscious some part of him refused to fully let go. Elena watched him sleep for a time, studying the lines of a face that had shown her so many versions of itself in the space of a few days: controlled authority, restrained fury, raw honesty, and now, finally, something close to peace. She did not sleep herself, not yet, her mind too full of everything the night had brought to allow rest. Instead, she thought of her father, of the house she had grown up in, of the version of her life that had existed before 3 men pounded on a door and changed everything beyond recognition. She wondered if she would ever fully forgive him for the choice he had made, or if some part of that wound would simply have to be carried alongside whatever new life was beginning to form around her now. A soft knock at the study door some hours later finally roused them both. Marta entered at Dante's tired call, her eyes taking in the scene, their joined hands, the exhaustion written across both their faces, without any visible surprise, as though she had suspected this outcome long before either of them had admitted it to themselves. "The situation at the gate has been fully contained," Marta reported. 2 of the intruders were detained. The others fled, once it became clear they would not reach the house. "There is more to discuss, but I thought you would want to know first that the immediate danger has passed." Dante straightened, some of the exhaustion clearing from his expression as duty reasserted itself. "Good," he said. "I will need the full report within the hour. And Marta, I want to know who among the household staff let a stranger near Elena's door 2 nights ago." "That question is no longer one I am willing to leave unanswered." "I have already been asking," Marta said. "I expect answers by this afternoon." She left them alone again, and Dante turned back to Elena, something rueful touching his tired features. "So much for the quiet morning I might have wished for," he said. "You did not strike me as a man who gets many quiet mornings," Elena said, and was rewarded with a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his face entirely, stripping away years of careful control in a way she had not yet seen from him. "Fewer every year," he admitted, "though I find myself minding it less than I once did." He rose, still holding her hand, drawing her up alongside him. "Come, you should eat something, and rest properly, in an actual bed, rather than a chair in my study. I have matters that require my attention this morning, but I do not intend to let you out of my sight for longer than necessary, not until I fully understand how deep the danger from last night truly runs." The days that followed settled into something Elena could not have predicted a week earlier, a strange blend of danger held at careful distance, and a closeness with Dante that grew steadier with each conversation, each shared meal, each quiet hour spent in his company, while his men worked to uncover who exactly had breached the household security. The investigation revealed, eventually, that the young man who had approached her door had indeed been working for the Countess, planted weeks earlier among newer staff hired during a period of expansion, waiting patiently for an opportunity to gather information that could be used against Dante. The discovery hardened something in Dante that Elena had not seen before, a coldness that emerged whenever the topic of the Countess arose, a promise of consequence that he did not bother to soften in her presence anymore. She understood, watching him during those conversations, that whatever gentleness he showed her existed alongside a capacity for ruthlessness that had kept him alive and in power, in a world that offered no mercy to those who lacked it. It should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, she found herself trusting the balance in him, the way his ruthlessness seemed to exist entirely in service of protecting what mattered to him, rather than as an end unto itself. One evening, nearly a week after the attack at the gate, Dante found her in the garden where Marta had first walked with her, sitting on a stone bench beneath the same trees, watching the last light fade from the sky. He sat beside her without a word at first, simply sharing the quiet, before finally speaking. "My father built this house as a fortress," he said. "Every window, every gate, every wall, designed to keep enemies out and secrets in. I grew up believing that was simply how a life like this had to be lived, walls upon walls, until eventually you forgot there was ever supposed to be anything worth protecting behind them." He turned to look at her, something vulnerable in his expression that she had rarely seen from him. "I had forgotten that, before you arrived. I want you to know that." "And now?" Elena asked, echoing the question he had once asked her. "Now I remember," Dante said simply, "and I find I am willing to fight harder for it than I have fought for anything in a very long time." Elena reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his, The way she had that first exhausted dawn in his study, no longer uncertain of the choice, no longer weighing gates and debts, and the terrible morning that had brought her here against what had grown steadily in the days since. "The contest will not stop," she said quietly. "Not because of one failed attempt at the gate." "No," Dante agreed. "They will not. There will be more danger before this is finished, Elena. I will not lie to you about that." His grip on her hand tightened, steady and certain despite the honesty of the warning. "But whatever comes, I intend to face it with you beside me, if that is what you choose. Not as a debt, not as a prisoner behind locked gates. As someone I have chosen, completely, with everything that choice requires of me." The garden had gone fully dark around them by the time she finally answered, the stars beginning to appear overhead, the danger still waiting somewhere beyond the walls entirely unresolved. But for the first time since the terrible morning her father's debt had delivered her into a stranger's hands, Elena felt no fear at all in the choice standing in front of her. "Then I choose it," she said. "All of it, whatever comes next." Dante drew her closer, and in the quiet dark of the garden, surrounded by walls built to keep danger out, and she now understood, capable of holding something worth protecting within them, the last of the distance between them finally disappeared entirely, leaving only the certainty of a choice neither of them intended to unmake. Gunfire cracked through the night air before Elena even fully understood she had been pulled from sleep, Dante's arm already around her, dragging her down and away from the window as glass shattered somewhere in the room beyond. "Stay low," he said, his voice tight and controlled, despite the chaos erupting outside, and she obeyed instantly, adrenaline flooding through her, faster than fear could take hold. "The contentious," she said, though it was not a question. "They grew tired of waiting," Dante said grimly, already moving toward the door, a weapon appearing in his hand from somewhere she had not seen it concealed. "Stay behind me. We move to the safe room, now." They ran together through corridors lit only by emergency lighting, the sounds of confrontation echoing from multiple directions throughout the house. Shouted commands, more gunfire, the heavy thud of running footsteps. Elena kept pace with Dante, refusing to slow him down, her heart hammering with a fear that had sharpened into something almost useful, a clarity that let her focus entirely on the next step, rather than the danger surrounding them. They reached a reinforced door, hidden behind what had appeared to be an ordinary wall panel, and Dante pulled it open, ushering her inside a small room lined with monitors, showing feeds from across the property. "Stay here," he said. "Lock this behind me. Do not open it for anyone except Marta or myself." "Where are you going?" Elena said, gripping his arm before he could turn away. "Dante, you cannot go back out there." "My men need direction," he said. "If I hide in here while they fight for this house, we lose everything, including you. I need you safe more than I need myself safe, Elena. Please, trust me to end this." She released his arm, though every instinct screamed against it, and watched him disappear back into the chaos of the corridor before she pulled the heavy door shut and locked it exactly as instructed. Alone in the small room, she turned to the monitors, watching grainy footage of the grounds and hallways, searching desperately for some glimpse of him among the chaos. She found him on one screen, moving through the ground floor with two of his men, directing them toward the eastern side of the house where the fighting seemed heaviest. Another screen showed intruders breaching through a service entrance near the kitchens, moving with purpose toward the interior of the house. Elena's stomach dropped as she realized the path they were taking led directly toward the wing where the safe room was located. She could not simply sit and watch danger approach without any way to warn him. Scanning the small room, she found a radio unit mounted near the monitors, the kind Marta had once shown her briefly during a tour of the house's less visible functions. Her hands shook as she activated it, praying she remembered enough to make it work. "Dante," she said into the receiver, keeping her voice low. "There are men coming through the kitchen entrance. They are heading toward the east corridor. I can see them on the monitor." A tense pause, then his voice crackled back, tight with focus but steady. "How many?" "3 that I can see," Elena said, watching the screen carefully. "Moving fast." "Understood. Stay locked in, Elena. I mean it." She watched on the monitor as Dante redirected 2 of his men toward the kitchen corridor, watched the confrontation unfold in grainy, silent footage, tension coiling tighter in her chest with every passing second, until the intruders were finally forced back, one captured, the others fleeing through the same entrance they had breached. The fighting continued for what felt like hours but was, according to the small clock mounted beside the monitors, closer to 40 minutes before the chaos outside the safe room finally began to quiet. She stayed at her post at the radio, relaying what she could see across the different camera feeds, watching Dante's forces gradually regain control of the house and grounds, pushing the remaining intruders back through the gate they had breached. Finally, the radio crackled again, Dante's voice carrying an exhaustion that told her the immediate danger had passed. "It is over," he said. "The Countess who made it inside are either captured or gone. I am coming to you now." She unlocked the door the moment she heard his footsteps in the corridor outside, unable to wait even the extra seconds caution might have demanded, and found him standing there, a shallow cut along his temple, his shirt torn at the shoulder, but alive, whole, looking at her with an intensity that stole whatever words she might have offered. "You should not have used the radio," he said, though there was no real reprimand in his voice, only relief so raw it nearly broke through his careful composure entirely. "You could have drawn attention to your location. You could have been shot coming through that corridor blind," Elena said. "I was not going to sit here and watch it happen without warning you." Something in his expression cracked open completely then, and he crossed the small distance between them, pulling her into an embrace that spoke more clearly than any words could have of exactly how close the night had come to costing him everything. "I told you to trust me to end this," he murmured against her hair. "I did not expect you to end up saving me in the process." "We ended it together," Elena said, pulling back just enough to look up at him. "That seems like the only way either of us was going to make it through tonight." The days that followed brought a shift Elena had not fully anticipated. Word spreading quickly through the city that the Conti family's assault on Marchetti territory had failed completely. Their forces captured or scattered, their reputation among the city's other powers badly damaged by an attack that had accomplished nothing beyond proving Dante's control remained absolute. Dante explained it to her plainly, without the careful softening he might once have used. "They will not recover easily from this," he said, sitting with her in the garden a week after the attack, the last of the damage to the house already being repaired by workers who came and went with quiet efficiency. "Their allies will see the failure and reconsider whether continued support is worth the risk. In this world, failure this visible is often more costly than any direct consequence I could have delivered myself." "So it is truly finished," Elena said. "The threat against us." "This particular threat, yes," Dante said. "I would be lying if I told you no danger would ever come again. This is the world I live in, Elena. I cannot promise you a life free of all risk, but I can promise you a life where you are never facing that risk, without someone beside you who would move through any amount of gunfire and chaos to reach you." Elena smiled, the fear of the past weeks finally beginning to loosen its grip on her chest, replaced by something steadier, something that felt, for the first time since the men had pounded on her father's door, like an actual future rather than a series of dangers to survive. "That sounds like a fair trade," she said. Later that afternoon, Dante led her to his study, the same room where they had first spoken honestly about what had grown between them, and retrieved a heavy ledger from his desk, the kind used to track debts owed across the many arrangements his family managed throughout the city. He found the page bearing her father's name, the careful figures documenting the sum Gerald Voss still technically owed, and without a word, tore the page free. "What are you doing?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already understood. "Ending this the right way," Dante said, folding the torn page and setting it aside. "This debt brought you to me through circumstances neither of us chose, and I will not pretend the beginning of this was anything other than what it was, but I will not have you stay in my life as a debt paid, Elena. Whatever you choose to do now, wherever you choose to go, your father's debt to me ends today, fully and without condition." Elena felt tears rise unexpectedly at the gesture, at the weight of what it meant. A man who had built his entire world around leverage and control, choosing, deliberately, to release the one piece of leverage that had first brought her into his life. "And if I choose to stay," she said softly, "now that there is no debt holding me here at all." Dante set down the ledger entirely and crossed to where she stood, taking both her hands in his, his expression more open and unguarded than she had ever seen it. "Then you would be staying because you want to be here," he said. "Not because any circumstance forced it. That is the only way I would ever want you to remain in my life, Elena. As a choice, freely made, with nothing binding you here except whatever you decide you want." "I already know what I want," Elena said, and found, to her own quiet astonishment, that the words carried none of the fear or hesitation that had once accompanied every thought about this house and the man who ruled it. "I want this. I want you. Not because of a debt, not because of locked gates, but because somewhere between that terrible morning and tonight, this became the life I choose for myself." Outside the tall windows of the study, the estate stretched calm and quiet under the afternoon sun. The danger that had once filled its halls finally settled. The walls that had first felt like a cage now standing simply as the boundaries of a life she had chosen, with clear eyes and an open heart. A few days later, a car arrived at the gate that Elena recognized immediately, and her chest tightened with a mixture of feelings she had not fully prepared herself to face. Her father stepped out slowly, older looking than she remembered from just weeks before, his eyes finding her where she stood near the entrance, with an expression caught somewhere between hope and shame. "I did not know if you would agree to see me," Gerald said, his voice unsteady in a way that reminded her, briefly, of the morning he had stood frozen in their doorway and said nothing while she was taken. "Dante told me you asked to come," Elena said carefully, neither warm nor cold, still uncertain how much of the old wound had truly healed. "I agreed, because I thought we both needed to say some things that were left unsaid." They walked together through the garden, the same path she had once walked with Marta, on her first confused day in this house. And Gerald spoke haltingly of the fear that had driven him to the choice he made, the desperation of a man who had run out of every other option and convinced himself, wrongly, that handing his daughter into an arrangement was somehow different from abandoning her outright. Elena listened without offering easy forgiveness, though she found, by the end of the walk, that some of the anger she had carried had loosened its hold, replaced by a tired, complicated understanding that did not excuse what he had done, but no longer demanded she carry the full weight of it either. "He tore up the debt," she told her father, as they reached the gate again, where his car still waited. "There is nothing left between you and Dante. You are free of it completely." Gerald's eyes filled at that, disbelief and gratitude warring across his tired face. "Why would he do that?" he asked. "After everything." "Because he wanted me to stay for the right reasons," Elena said simply. "Not because a ledger said I owed him anything." Her father nodded slowly, seeming to understand, for the first time, the difference between the man he had once feared and the man his daughter had come to know in the weeks since. "Are you happy here, Elena?" he asked quietly, the question carrying more genuine concern than she had heard from him in a very long time. "I am," she said, and found the answer came without hesitation, without any need to convince herself first. "For the first time in longer than I can remember." He left soon after, the visit brief but necessary, and Elena stood at the gate, watching his car disappear down the long drive, feeling something settle inside her that had been unsettled since the morning everything changed. It was not a full reconciliation, not yet, perhaps not ever completely, but it was a beginning, and she found she could accept that as enough for now. That evening, Dante found her still standing near the garden as the sky began to color with the last light of day, and settled beside her without asking what the visit had stirred, simply offering his presence, as he so often did now, steady and quiet, when quiet was what she needed most. "It is strange," Elena said eventually, leaning into him as his arm settled around her shoulders. "How much has changed since that morning? I thought my life had ended when those men came to the door. I did not imagine it was actually just beginning." "Neither did I," Dante admitted. "I have spent so many years believing this life left no room for anything beyond duty and survival. You have shown me otherwise, in a remarkably short amount of time, whether either of us intended it or not." Elena turned to look up at him, the last light catching in his eyes, softer now than she had ever imagined they could be, the first morning she saw him standing in the doorway of a cold, unfamiliar room. "What happens now?" she asked. "Beyond tonight. Beyond the Countess and the debt and everything that brought us here. Now, Dante said, drawing her closer. We simply live. Carefully, perhaps, given the world I still have to navigate. But together, and by choice, for as long as you will have me. That sounds like it could be a very long time, Elena said, a smile breaking through as she said it, the first truly unguarded smile she had allowed herself since arriving at this house that had once felt like a prison, and now, undeniably, felt like home. I am counting on it, Dante said, and in the fading light of the garden, with the estate quiet and safe around them, the danger finally settled, and the debt long since torn to nothing, they stayed together, as the stars began to rise, two people who had found, in the wreckage of a terrible beginning, something neither of them had expected to build, and neither of them now intended to let go.